I just want to go through the sequence of events that took place over the last 24 hours or so that caused this conflagration in the Middle East, the conflict in the Middle East between Iran and Israel and the U.S. to flare up just completely dramatically and dangerously. It started when Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu began making blood-curdling threats to the Lebanese living in the south of Beirut, in the Dahia. It means the suburbs of Beirut, the southern suburbs that is largely Shiite, but also a lot of Christian communities. There are Sunni living there, there are Druze living there, secular people living there. It is actually, even though it's called the suburbs, the southern suburbs of Beirut, it is actually one of the most densely populated parts of Lebanon and the Middle East. It's certainly more densely populated than the Christian neighborhoods where, when I used to live there, where I used to live in East Beirut, in Ashrafiyah. A lot of shops, businesses, hospitals, etc. And Israel began making threats of hitting it. And Iran said, if you hit the southern suburbs of Beirut, you're already hitting southern Lebanon, you're in a war there with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is fighting back. But if you go and you strike at the families of those fighters that are fighting you, sometimes to a standstill in southern Lebanon, we're going to respond. Donald Trump has been trying for days and tried more recently to tell the Israelis publicly, privately, don't go towards Beirut, don't hit Beirut. And guess what Benjamin Netanyahu did? He hit Beirut. Iran responded by launching several volleys of ballistic missiles at northern Israel. And then the Israelis responded by hitting energy sites and alleged military targets in Iran, including southern Iran, with fighter jets and airstrikes. And then Iran launched another wave of strikes at Israel. And then Yemen's Houthis also launched at least one ballistic missile toward Israel, to Israel. Not sure if it hit anything or if it was intercepted or fell short of its target. This war was escalating, revving back up. Even though Donald Trump, in several interviews with people, said that he didn't want this war to go up, that he was telling Benjamin Netanyahu to stop responding and to not respond. And so what happened in this particular instance is that this war was on the verge of flaring back up in a major way. And Iran said, okay, no more strikes. We're finished with military operations. And if Israel stops too, we will stop. And that caused Israel to stop as well, apparently, at least for now. I'm Borzu Dergahi. I am a foreign correspondent. I've been covering the Middle East for more than 20-something years. And this is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can find me at Substack at borzu.substack.com. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. This has been a really crazy day. It is Monday, June 8th. I had a whole show planned out, edited and ready to go, but events overtook that show and I'll have to redo everything. And I did a bunch of interviews over the weekend to give you some background about what has happened in Lebanon. If you want, you can go back. Last week, I did a podcast that outlined the more than 500-year ties between Lebanon and Iran, that it's not just about Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran, that this history goes way back with Lebanon. It goes back to the time of the Shah, as well as back to the Safavid dynasty in Iran, which imported Shia clerics to come and convert the Persia, ancient Persia, from Sunni Islam to Shia Islam. But anyway, this was a very dangerous moment over the last few hours. It looked like we were going back to the kind of war that we had in March and early April, this kind of ferocious all-out conflict. The reason why that conflict stopped was because the next step in the escalation cycle between the U.S., Iran, and Israel was to just start aggressively targeting each other's energy and civilian infrastructure. That was what Donald Trump was threatening to do. And then in response, Iran was threatening to do the same to Israel and the Gulf states. And so that is really the reason why that conflict stopped, was because it just, the costs of it to continue it would be way too expensive for everyone involved. And in fact, This is why we don't have a war right now. Not because Donald Trump is merciful and didn't want to harm Iranian people, not because of some humanitarian reasons, not because of anything else other than the fact that the next stage is hitting energy targets. And that is, in fact, exactly what Israel did. It hit energy targets in southern Iran. It would have hit more if the conflict continued to flare up, if I'm sure there weren't panic calls from the White House urging Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the conflict, because it's just going to be way too expensive. And while Israel sees Iran as an existential threat, wrongly in my opinion, the United States and the rest of the world absolutely do not, and they don't want this war to cost them a 10-year depression. I spoke extensively about the situation in Lebanon, the ongoing peace talks, the government in Lebanon trying to negotiate with the United States, while at the same time a separate track of negotiations was developing between Nabi Berri, the Shia leader, and Pakistan, and perhaps even the White House. I spoke extensively about these topics in a few interviews with India's NewsX that I'm going to play for you.
In remarks that underscore growing tensions between Beirut and Tehran, Un said Lebanon rejects being drawn into regional power, struggles and insists on defending its own sovereignty and national interests. The comments come as Lebanon participates in US-mediated negotiations with Israel aimed at securing a broader ceasefire and restoring stability along the border. Un has repeatedly stressed that no one will negotiate on Lebanon's behalf and that the country's diplomatic track must remain separate from wider US-Iran negotiations. We are now being joined by Bozu Dogati, who is an Iranian-American journalist and founder of the Badlands newsletter, joining us live from Istanbul. How do you think Lebanon is feeling in this exact moment right now? As Iran have been saying that they are not going to be dealing with any sort of peace deal unless Lebanon and Israel are also Hezbollah and Israel are also tied in. Donald Trump is very much trying to steer away from that in his peace deal with Iran as well. What more can you tell me, please?
There's a lot of questions there, but I would just say that perhaps Iran is somewhat using Lebanon as a bargaining chip, but it seems that the Lebanese government, as it is now, should perhaps embrace that, or at least take a more neutral position on that. If someone is trying to broker a peace or put pressure on the Israelis to stop killing Lebanese people and occupying Lebanese territories, maybe you should take whatever help you can get. That would be one position. The fact that Mr. Aoun, he made this comments with Christiane Amanpour. She got off of the plane, has been noted, and immediately went to the president's. This was not a good look, because one of the criticisms that Hezbollah makes is that there's basically no air between the U.S. embassy in Beirut and this particular government. And it does sound like he was just sort of mouthing the talking points that Mark Rubio's State Department has been saying. Now, I'm not saying those talking points are necessarily accurate or inaccurate, but it doesn't look good that he made this in this way, and it bolsters the argument that this particular Lebanese government is little more than an American puppet. And as for the whole issue with Hezbollah and Iran, the Lebanese government, as it is constituted, and given the fractured state of the Lebanese political body, may not see Iran as a patron or a partner and so on. But the plurality of the Lebanese population is Shia, and the Shia not necessarily 100%, but they overwhelmingly back Hezbollah and they feel affinity towards Iran. I've lived in Lebanon. I've experienced this myself. It's a little bit disingenuous to speak on behalf of all of the Lebanese people and say that Lebanon does not want this particular pressure or this particular leverage imposed on Israel and the United States. The really toxic part is how it just sounds like exactly what the State Department wants the president of Lebanon to say.
With US-mediated ceasefire negotiations underway between Lebanon and Israel, Can Beirut realistically maintain an independent diplomatic track while Iran remains a key influence through Hezbollah?
Poor Lebanon has never had any kind of real sovereignty or independence. It's always been a sort of playground for regional and global powers. You had the president today complaining about Iranian interference in Lebanon's sovereignty. Meanwhile, there's thousands of Israeli troops on Lebanese territory, and he didn't seem to have a lot of complaints about that. So I think that the situation is rather complicated. Can these ongoing negotiations yield any results and bring about a peace? I don't think so. I think that as long as Israel is determined to continue this conflict, as long as Benjamin Netanyahu feels like he needs a kind of state of crisis, at least before those October elections or until those October elections, I don't think there's going to be any halt to the fighting. No matter what peace talks continue, no matter what peace agreements are made, the fighting will probably continue. Hezbollah is also determined. They've figured out these first-person view, fiber optic powered drones that have been hitting the Israeli forces in southern Lebanon rather hard. They're really enthusiastic to fight with those. And it's really a bad sign when you have two forces that are eager to fight instead of eager to settle down to a peace.
Reports suggesting that Pakistan is facilitating back-channel communications between the United States and Iran. How significant could this mediation role be?
Now, Lebanon's government has made it clear that it does not want to be linked to these Iran talks. Despite that, it appears there's another track that includes Lebanon's Shia plurality, that includes the Amal party of Nabi Berri, communicating with both the White House and the Iranians, to which they are quite close. And so there seems to be two tracks of diplomacy, one between Israel and Lebanon and the Israeli-Lebanon connection in Washington, which is being mediated by Washington. And then there's this other channel that seems to be where the real negotiations are going on. And the evidence of that is you have this Pakistani official flying quietly to Lebanon, not a lot of press briefings about it. He's not appearing on CNN. He's going to talk to key players in Lebanon about de-escalating the situation as a way of de-escalating the situation in the Persian Gulf.
Jordan has strongly condemned the killing of Lebanese soldiers and reaffirmed support for strengthened state institutions. Is there growing regional consensus behind empowering national armies over non-state armed groups in the Middle East?
That consensus has been there for some time. And I think even Hezbollah, if they are honest and when you talk to them, as I have in previous years, they will say that we would love to hand over control over Lebanon and hand over our arms to the Lebanese armed forces, but we just don't think they can handle it. We don't think they can protect the country against Israel, and that's what they've been saying. So I think absolutely there's a preference to have all arms in the country, all forces and all military forces under the control of a central government, whether in Lebanon or in Iraq, which also has this problem with militias. But what the argument is that these fractured governments, largely under the control of the United States, they don't have what it takes to protect against Israel.
Could closer military and diplomatic coordination between Pakistan and Lebanon contribute to wider regional stabilization efforts, or is the current crisis too deeply rooted in broader geopolitical rivalries?
I mean, I don't think these talks are going to amount to much, Ellie, to be honest, just because Israel is determined to keep fighting and Hezbollah is also determined to keep fighting. But I don't think any kind of diplomacy is a bad thing, and it's good that there is continued talking. On the other hand, the fact that Israel continues to violate the ceasefire and the Hezbollah appears eager to fight back whenever it can and in ferocious and effective ways is going to keep the conflict going on. If you notice, every ceasefire so far that has been declared has been broken by the U.S. and Israel. And then, of course, the other side hits back, but both in the Persian Gulf and Israel, they seem to have this very different definition, the U.S. and Israel, about what a ceasefire means. Ceasefire seems to mean like things are calm until we decide that we have an opportunity to attack, and then they attack, and then the other side hits back, and then they say, what about the ceasefire? So there's this constant pattern which shows actually that no one really wants a ceasefire, or at least the Americans and the Israelis don't.
Now we have heard some statements coming from the Iranian speaker, Mohammad Ghalibaf. He has said that Iran will cease negotiations and engage in direct confrontation, talking about Israel's conduct in southern Lebanon and Beirut. Bozu, he's also said that the United States and Israel only respond to the language of power. How true are these statements coming from the Iranian speaker?
Ghalibaf has somewhat of a point. I think it has to do with this Washington's kind of chauvinism and militaristic outlook, its belief, and it keeps running into this belief that it can use military means to resolve these thorny diplomatic matters. And this belief only seems to have been challenged when the U.S. gets a punch in the face. So it seems like the only language, this Washington consensus that we need to hit them hard and we need to hit them harder, the only way to reason with that is some kind of military defeat delivered to the U.S., i.e., for example, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now what the Iranians believe in Iran. So I sympathize with that view. On the other hand, if the Iranians do plunge back into war, if they do respond militarily, they're in a quandary because that basically plays right into Israel's hand. Israel does not want these negotiations to succeed. They've said that publicly numerous times. They want the U.S. to go back into a war, further degrade Iran, and possibly commit to overthrowing the regime. So I think the Iranians they have a point, but they're also in a dilemma.
Bozu, there's also strikes that have targeted southern Lebanon, also some strikes that have hit Beirut as well. These latest strikes in Beirut have apparently caused a bit of a rift between the American president and the Israeli prime minister. Do you think that we're seeing the indications of some cracks between the relationship between Israel and the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some cracks. I think there's a broad disaffection among certain American elites toward Israel. If you looked at the front page of the New York Times website just earlier today, it was like 3 headlines: Israel is spying on the U.S., Israel is killing people in Gaza, and Israel killed a kid in the West Bank, and like Israel killed people in Lebanon. And this was the front page of America's newspaper of record. So that criticism is coming from all segments. I think that Pentagon report is like, they're leaking to major news outlets that certain people in the Pentagon are really worried about Israeli penetration of the national security establishment in the U.S. This used to be a topic that you couldn't even bring up without being called names like anti-Semite or something. And now people are openly bringing it up and putting it on the front page of the New York Times, this infiltration of the U.S. national security apparatus by Israel. And just with regard to Lebanon, when we say these words like Israel hit the southern suburbs of Beirut, it's not really a suburb in the kind of Western sense of suburb. It's just a little bit outside of Beirut. And it's probably one of the most densely populated parts of Lebanon where the Israelis are hitting. So these are very impactful. They're hitting apartment blocks full of people, and it's causing a lot of casualties, a lot of misery, a lot of pain, and scenes of horror. So it does inspire a reaction, including from people like Donald Trump.
Iran announces an end to its first wave of attacks on Israel since April, but threatens to resume strikes if Israel continues its assault on Lebanon. And Washington makes its position clear. Trump calls on both sides to immediately stop shooting. Israel's internal media channels, however, signifying something different. Do you see the Lebanese front once again being the cause of a renewed outbreak of violence once again?
Fighting is continuing in southern Lebanon, and that has been a sore point for Israel because the Lebanese Hezbollah is hitting back. And it's the problem for Israel is these first-person view fiber optic powered drones in which Hezbollah is using to target the Lebanese troops in the south of Lebanon that are basically unfolding a de facto occupation of the south of Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and a little bit north. And they've been getting hit really hard. They have not yet come up with a solution for these fiber optic powered drones. And so they're in a dilemma, and one of the things that they started to do was to threaten to hit South Beirut. And the Iranians said, okay, look, you guys are fighting in southern Lebanon. It seems like a fair fight down there. But if you're going to go to southern Beirut and hit these fighters' families and relatives and so on, because that was the strategy, essentially, because of what is happening in southern Lebanon, we're going to intervene. And then Iran intervened. Israel struck back, was lobbying the U.S. for an even more aggressive response. Donald Trump, in a situation where he's hosting the World Cup this week, the eyes of the world are going to be on the U.S. He doesn't want this, at least not now. He pressured Israel to hold back, to hold its fire, not to get the U.S. too involved. Of course, the U.S. was involved. It provided the refueling planes for Israel. Israel doesn't have those planes to launch these airstrikes to refuel their jets above Iranian skies. And then there was another pair of volleys back and forth between Iran and Israel. The U.S. said, please stop this, to both parties through intermediaries. And the Iranians announced that they would stop if Israel would stop, and Israel also stopped. But that fighting in Lebanon continues.
In terms of Hezbollah's current capabilities, how much do we know about how much military equipment and power they actually have left?
I think they still have considerable support. I think they lost a lot of that support when they initially, in early March, launched attacks on Israel in coordination with Iran in an attempt to put pressure on Israel as it was fighting against Iran. But since Israel's response, and this happens every time, and it also happened in the 80s, because of the ferocity and disproportionality of the Israeli response, Hezbollah won back the Shia community in Lebanon. It's not going to win back the Sunni community or the Christian communities anytime soon, but it definitely won back the plurality of the Shia population in the south and in southern Beirut, as well as other parts of the country, the Bekaa Valley. They are behind it. As for their military capabilities, not sure. They seem to still have an arsenal of short-term missiles, but it's the drones, these very precise drones, maybe costing, as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations was bringing a drone to the UN General Assembly, picking up one of these drones, maybe costing a couple $100, strapped with explosives, going into the camps, going inside the tents of the Israelis. And then to add insult to injury, you were talking about we're not seeing a lot of images coming out of southern Lebanon. The only images we are seeing is the footage of these Hezbollah attacks on the Israelis. This is humiliating for the Israelis. There is a rumor out there that one of their most elite brigades, the Golani brigades, was struck very hard over the weekend, and that might have been the impetus that caused Israel to threaten and to launch attacks on southern Beirut.
In terms of the Strait of Hormuz, how much of an issue is it for Donald Trump? How much pressure is Donald Trump now under to get those straits open?
I think the fundamental misunderstanding people have about Donald Trump, and I've spoken about this before, is that they think that he has those kinds of strategic goals at all. Donald Trump just wants to look good. He wants a deal that makes him look like a winner, so to speak. He doesn't really, I don't think that he cares about the finer points of nuclear technology and enrichment levels and so on. I don't really think he cares that much about the Strait of Hormuz, except maybe for the fact that his golf buddies in Mar-a-Lago are hassling him about it and asking when will this strait be reopened before there is demand destruction in the consumer market and people start moving towards EVs. I think that it's not about policy decisions. It's about him. He's intensely corrupt, and he's also intensely narcissistic. So if he can get a deal that looks like he's a winner and he won't be criticized by Mark Levin and he won't be trashed on Fox News by the people that he watches on TV, he'll go for that deal, whether it's giving Iran certain concessions or taking certain concessions from Iran. It doesn't matter to him as long as that he can sort of sell it to his base and come out looking better than his nemesis, Barack Obama, the former president who made a nuclear deal that he tore up in 2018. I'm Borzu Dargahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can find me at Substack at borzu.substack.com. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube,